Hello and welcome to the Amplifier Podcast, the show where the best in business discuss how you can grow your business best. I'm Wyatt McPherson, I produce this show, and today our host Don Cooper is joined again by a very special guest, Dr. BJ Fogg, for part 2 of a 2-part conversation. Dr. Fogg is the author of Tiny Habits, the founder of the Behavior Design Lab at Stanford University, and is on the show today to discuss how utilizing smart behavior design can assist an entrepreneur in their day-to-day life by helping to reduce bad habits for them, with part 1 of this conversation diving deeper into how behavior design can help to create good habits that are likely to help entrepreneurs and their journey to success. So definitely make sure you check out our first episode with BJ Fogg after this one, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss any episodes in the future. But with all of that said, I truly do hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Amplifier Podcast.
What about when you're trying to remove a bad habit or a behavior you want to get rid of in your life? Like, how can you use your work to understand how to hack that better?
I've got good news and bad news. The good news is all behavior, including stopping a behavior, will come down to motivation, ability, and prompt. So if you can remove motivation, bam, you're free of that habit. If you can remove ability, like make it impossible, you're free. If you can remove the prompt, you're free. But for many of these habits like this, it's not that simple. Something like, let's say, okay, I eat a little bit of chocolate every day, but I see it as a vitamin. I don't have a big chocolate issue, but let's pretend like I did. Let's pretend like I'm just eating way too much chocolate. And I'm like, oh my God.
It looks like dark chocolate, so it's probably healthy.
Yeah, 86%. Yes, it's like a little, it's right next to my little vitamin dish. So I do view it as like a health food. But let's say I just eat chocolate, too much chocolate. So I can stop or reduce that by decreasing my motivation. Well, in reality, somebody who's eating a ton of chocolate, are you going to be able to reduce their motivation? No, that's not going to work. Can you reduce their ability or make it harder to do? Yes. I mean, you can say, guess what? No chocolate in the house. I'm not going to buy chocolate. I'm not going to have a dish sitting on my desk with chocolate in it, right? Redesign your environment to make it harder to do. That's a reasonable option. The third one is, can you remove the prompt for eating chocolate? And the answer there is probably no, because you're self-prompting. We're going back to pack person. It's the person prompt where you think chocolate would really be good right now, and you're motivated to have chocolate. So in that case, the only lever you have is the ability lever. And so you got to focus in there. So you can systematically analyze the habits that you want to stop and say, can I reduce motivation? Can I make it harder to do? Can I remove the prompt? And if you can remove any one of those, the behavior won't happen. Then there are other habits. Now, this is the bad news. For things that, like maybe chocolate addiction or other kinds of addiction, it can be a tangle of behaviors. It's just not one simple behavior. It's like, so don't think of breaking a bad habit, think of untangling a bad habit. And then there's more of a process. And it's doable in many cases, just like untangling a phone cord. And then in other cases, if it's a pretty serious addiction and if it's harming your life, I just say, go find a specialist who that's what she does or he does all the time. Just find the right specialist to help you untangle that unwanted addiction in your life. Great
advice. I mean, a few months ago, I guess it was 4 or 5 months ago, what I found interesting from a nutrition standpoint is if you're in a household with a bunch of your family members, they don't all have the same motivations as you to eat healthy and to remove certain things. So from an environment, from a context standpoint, there's a lot of foods that might be in the same places that, if you go in to get something healthy, if your son or your daughter or your wife has like a big box of chocolates next there, you go, oh, do I eat the pita, healthy pita, whole wheat crisps, or do I eat those Doritos? I'm not sure if those are either healthier, but the example is the same. And what I found is that we had this cupboard that had all kinds of snacky foods in there. I kept my healthy protein snacks in there, and I always had the ability. I always make sure I have lots of that stuff in the house. But I still found at 10 o'clock at night, if I was prompted with I'm hungry, and I wanted to go to get a protein bar that was low in sugar, I open up the cupboard and there's a Kit Kat bar right next to it. And I went, ooh, my motivation is low, my prompt is high, and my ability just got wiped out. And just what I did, just from the work that we did together, is I removed all of my stuff from that cupboard. So I have no reason whatsoever to go in there. And I had my wife get me 2 baskets, one for my office and one for in the living room, where I kept all of my healthy snacks. So the context changed. So when I got that physical prompt, I was motivated to eat healthier. I had a different place to go, and it transformed that risk of falling into a bad habit.
Good job.
What happens in the, for yourself or in the workplace when you're trying to diagnose why someone or yourself isn't doing something? I remember a story a few years ago. I had a manager walk into my office, and he wanted to fire an administrative member of his team. He says, she's not doing this, she's not doing that. I said, and his conclusion right off the get-go was, she doesn't want to do this job. And I went, really? And I said, how did you come to that conclusion? Well, she's not doing it, so therefore it's motivation.
Well, and where you're headed with this is a really great direction. So if somebody's not doing a behavior you want them to do, there is a step-by-step. All of this, everybody, this is a system. Behavior design is a system. When you learn to use it, you don't have to guess, you just go through the system. So for troubleshooting, number one, make sure that the behavior is clear. Let's say that there's an environment where people are supposed to be wearing earplugs, but they're not. And you just said, oh, have ear protection. Well, maybe you need to be clear. It's like, no, this means putting on these earmuffs or these earplugs, right? This exact type. Be clear on the behavior, number one. Then if they're not doing it, then you look and see, is there a prompt? Is there something that reminds them to do it? So you don't start with motivation. You start with, well, is there a reminder? And it could be that the prompt is after you close your locker, that then is your reminder to put in the earplug. So you might use an action prompt, or maybe there's another kind of way that you prompt to remind them. If they're being prompted and they still don't do it, the next thing you look at is abilities, still not motivation. It's like, well, is this easy to do? No, because the earplugs are at a different side of the office building, or they have to unwrap them, or they have to go buy them or something like that. So then you make it really easy to do the behavior. So now they're being prompted, the behavior is clear. They're being prompted and it's really easy. In most cases, they do the behavior. If they're still not doing the behavior, however, then you know by the process of elimination, you know it's a motivation problem. And then you want to dig into that and say, well, what is demotivating this, and so on. So in the system of behavior design, when you're troubleshooting, there is a step-by-step process, and motivation comes last. If everything else fails, that's when you look at motivation, and that's when you can conclude it's a motivation problem. Most of the time, it's not a motivation problem, but sometimes it is. But you don't want to jump to that conclusion if it's really a prompt problem where they're just not remembering, and you get all worked up about motivation, or you say you don't want this job, and they're like, no, you're going to offend somebody. Right? I just needed to be a reminder. What can remind me to do this? So help people design prompts in their life, help make it easy to do. And then if they don't do it and it is a motivation problem, then you can deal with that head on. But that's the last resort. That's when you're at the end of your rope, is when you start messing around with the motivation issues.
And I think that's counterintuitive to how a lot of people think, particularly young managers and supervisors. When someone's not doing something, they think it's an attitude, a motivational issue on the person. But there's so much more that comes before that. And I mean, obviously, there's ability and prompt and motivation. But even I think when I look at this often, if you look at it from a behavior design standpoint, then it might not even be the employee. It might be, let's look at the set of behaviors that we've created or not created here. Is the process that we have put together in our business, in our organization, the right process that's going to create the right set of behaviors?
Right, exactly. And all of this can be systematized. The discovering of what those behaviors are, the designing those habits, the troubleshooting, all of it can be systematized under and that's what's exciting about the book Tiny Habits. Yes, is a system for habits, but I also described the broader work of behavior design that you can use for any kind of behaviors, which could be one-time actions. It could be behaviors that happen on a temporary basis. It can be stopping behaviors. Habits are one type of behavior, but behavior design applies to all behavior types, which includes habits, but there's other types as well.
And, using your behavior model and that pack person, you have a lot of different ways you can design any individual behavior. But there's one of those that's not a great idea. Right? Which one is that? Because I had a debate with my wife this morning.
Yeah.
We were talking about some chores for my 18-year-old, and she kept saying, well, when we were young, we didn't have to be told 10 times. We just remembered.
Okay.
I don't know about you, darling, but I think I had to be told 10 times.
Yeah, Don, I know you're pitching me a softball here, so I can hit a home run, but
yeah,
I don't
please.
know. There's a variety of mistakes that get made. Let me start with one.
Yeah.
And then I can go to others if you're looking for others. The most common mistake is to give somebody something abstract, like clean up your room or be safe or be more productive, and then just motivate that abstraction. We're going to motivate you to be more productive. That's a mistake. That's not behavior design. Because in behavior design, you define the behavior and you make it
actions.
Yeah, specific action, and you make it easy to do. Whereas this mistake where you're motivating somebody towards something abstract, that's the opposite of behavior design. But so often we do that. Just so often it's like, oh, please eat healthy. Eating healthy is important for your life and your grandkids. And
I hear it with a lot of contractors all the time in our space where they say to other employees, work safe, work safe, work safe. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the main mistakes in behavior design. That's not behavior design, but in traditional ways. The other one is assuming that information alone will lead to behavior change. Like, oh, if we just give information about, let's say the statistics on accidents here, that will then change somebody's attitude around safety, which will then change somebody's behavior around safety. That sequence of information, changing attitudes, and then changing behavior is a very weak sequence. It can work, but it's the exception, not the rule. So relying on information alone,
you call that the information fallacy or something? It was
I call it the information action fallacy. So you can go, boom, information alone isn't the key to changing behavior.
Right. And what about remembering? Because I don't remember to do these things.
It depends what it is, actually. Part of that is just providing a good prompt at the right time. I mean, that's what a prompt essentially is. It's a way for you to remember to do something. And if you're not remembering to do something that you want to do and you can do, then it is a prompt design challenge, which is not so tough. I mean, we are designing prompts for ourselves throughout our workday. I mean, writing little, Post-it notes, putting things on our to-do list, putting things on our calendar, et cetera, et cetera. We're good at prompt design. We just have to know when to apply it. And we just have to be realistic that when a behavior doesn't happen, let's start with making sure there's a prompt and be explicit and deliberate about designing the prompt.
In our space, I see a lot of what I would say the companies will have, it's a very compliance industry. So there's lots of procedures that are 8 pages long and they've got 47 steps. And then people don't use them, don't follow them because they're not a process or they're not a set of behaviors. It's information and instruction. It's not action. Can you describe how that can be done better to create that set of actions, that set of behaviors?
Yeah.
It's not about 8 pages of instructions. I mean, the learning part might be valuable, but that's really ability, isn't it? That's really training.
Yes, exactly. It comes down to, for these more complicated types of behavior change, whether that's sleeping better or eating better or getting more physical movement, we're not talking about just one behavior, like eat blueberries and now you're eating better. It's a collection or a constellation of behaviors. So I suspect in safety, it's that as well.
Yeah,
So just
absolutely.
be really clear about what is the behavior that you do and when do you do it? So just be really, really clear about that. The when speaks to the prompt, what is the time when you do this behavior? And then I would think, as a leader or a manager or as a behavior designer, you say, how do we make this really easy to do? Now, because most people, I don't want to say most, some people won't know how to make something easy to do. They'll just say, oh, it's hard. But if you make it so easy to do, let's say, for example, let's go to my HOA board meeting. And let's say that the word did not get out that we want everybody to wear masks to the meeting because the county just called for that again. Well, we could send people home to get their masks, but instead we could have masks right there at the door. So as they walk in, somebody hands them a mask and they don't have one. So they get prompted by the person at the door. We make it really easy to do by handing them the mask. The motivation's kind of built in because, one, my neighbors want to stay safe, and two, they don't want to look stupid or like a rebel to their neighbors. So that's how you would behavior design that one. The mistake would be to make it hard to do, say, go home and get your mask. People aren't going to respond to that very well. When you make a behavior easy to do, that people want to do, they tend to thank you. It's like, thank you so much, So that's hypothetical
to me
because we didn't do
recently.
that. I was not in charge of the meeting today, so that didn't happen. I was like, this could have happened, but it didn't.
I've always been a big advocate in my companies to provide lots of training, lots of resources, books, put off courses, provide lots of role play, put off training seminars. And there were certain things that people just couldn't do. It didn't make it easy enough to train them. We actually had to take it another step. And, the example was, we sell a lot of complicated industrial solutions that require at different steps as you interact with a customer, you've got to collect a lot of information. You've got to ask a lot of questions. And inevitably, my team would, hang up to them. A lot of my team are very technical. They know how to execute the work, but they might not be instinctive or experienced in habits to ask all the questions to help that flow. And so we would train them lots, and here's all the questions you need to ask. Here's why you need to ask it. And it still wasn't happening. And so what we did to make it easier is we just took all of that, and we already managed those business opportunities in a tool, in a CRM. And so we just baked all that right into the system. So when they opened up an opportunity, it said, at this step, here's the 18 things you got to find out, and here's the set of questions you've got to ask. So 9 months ago, some of my operations people would say, like, we'd be reviewing a piece of business, and I'd say, well, what do we know about this, 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 and this? And they went, oh, I don't know. And did you meet with the customer? Yeah, but I found out all the engineering specifications, but I didn't find out about any of the business information. And they said, this is impossible, Don. You can't do this in one conversation. It's impossible. I went, oh, okay. And I kept saying, no, you can do this all in one conversation. You don't need to call the customer back 5 times and annoy the customer because you keep going back because you need to have 3 conversations. And so we just built this tool that prompted them and gave them the tools to say, ask these 18 things in that first meeting. Fast forward to 3 months ago, and one of those operations managers said to me, Don, this is so easy. Like, you can get all this information in one meeting. And I'm like, and a year ago, I would have called people an idiot for not figuring that out. But what I realized is I was the idiot because I was training them, but I still wasn't making it easy enough to do. And by adding that next element of easy, now everyone thinks it's easy to do. And now it is easy to do because they don't have to remember what are the 18 things they need to ask the client.
And let me build on that. That's a great example. When something is easy to do, it doesn't require lots of motivation to do it. And this is an important insight from my behavior model. the graphical version, which doesn't come across in audio. I mean, I could say B equals MAT, but there's an X and Y axis version of the same model. And what that makes clear is the easier behavior is, the less motivation somebody has to do it. So if you can make it really easy, like you did, Don, then people don't have to be super motivated. If it's hard, then it does require motivation, and motivation won't always be there. So by making it easier to do, yeah, you get more compliance, you get more adherence, you get more whatever, people are doing it. In part because the motivation doesn't have to be very high to do it. So the easier the behavior, the more likely it's going to happen, because it's not so dependent on levels of motivation.
I'm going to ask you a question that I actually don't know the answer to, because I like to learn something new every time I talk to you as well. But when you think about behavior design and you're creating, particularly in business environments, when you take behavior design and do it really well, what kinds of improvements and changes in business results and have you seen and heard of when someone has gone from poor behavior design to really applying your methods to make a dramatic change?
Wow, where do I start in this? I'll start with the health domain. With patients,
yeah,
and the behavior design, here are the new habits we want you to do. It's the difference between doing those habits and not doing those habits. In terms of, let's say, personal productivity, it's the difference between feeling guilty about not finishing the project to finishing the project ahead of time. I mean, it's a big deal when it comes to something more like personal nutrition, where you're just like, oh, I'm going to eat healthier. I need to eat healthier. That's motivating, an abstract thing. And then when you just put it down to the nitty gritty of what snack am I going to eat in the afternoon, and how do I make that easy to do? And then what breakfast am I going to have? It's the difference between feeling bad that you didn't stick to some abstract thing versus, man, I'm changing how I eat and I'm feeling better. So it really is a dramatic difference, often between failure and success. And people love it. I mean, sometimes, and you hinted on this, Don, sometimes when people use behavior design, they're like, oh my gosh, that worked. Can it really be this easy? And it's like, yeah, if you use behavior design in the right way, many, not all, but many types of behavior changes are really easy to do. Now, there are some difficult ones, like if the behavior is unpleasant, if the behavior is painful, that's never easy to design for, because people are going to be motivated to do unpleasant or painful or embarrassing behaviors. They don't want to do that. So there are some exceptions, but taking those exceptions off the table of behaviors
the
that
motivation
are
needs to be the motivation for unpleasant behaviors needs to be really high. I learned that firsthand when I was 17. I went through your boot camp this year, which was way more pleasant than this story. I went through airborne parachute training, military training when I was 17. And that is like the hell week kind of thing you see when you see things about the Navy SEALs. All the behaviors that they put you through are designed to make you crack physically so that they can get you mentally tough. And I saw some of the most physically fit, capable, way better ability guys than me drop like flies when they combined physical challenge, physical ability was hard, and mental ability was pushed. And then they prompted you saying, just get up and quit, just get up and quit. It was a combination of mental ability and physical ability with a prompt. I didn't recognize that then, I recognize it now. What they were challenging ability and then prompting you with the action of just quit, because we don't want losers on this group. We started with 56 young guys, and 34 of us passed. Wow. And it was all hard to do, physical pain. They ran us. It was really taxing.
I like that example, Don, but I want to be clear. That's not a model for how to manage a company.
That's a different model.
The military is an exception where they can really boost motivation. They can really get you to do hard behaviors that you don't want to do because they have kind of total control over your life. Employees, at least in today's world, man, if you're doing that kind of thing, they're like, I'm out of here. I'm going to go get a different job. Right. Yeah. So you can't really. Now at Stanford, I kind of have the same opportunity the military has because I give grades and the students really care about their grades, and it's temporary. Notice it's not a habit. So if I have a deadline for a project or if I have a really hard exam, I can get them to work really hard temporarily because I'm dangling this carrot in front of them and they really want the grades. But most of our workplace environments are not like the military, and they're not like a classroom where you are working with motivated students who care a lot about grades.
Yeah. And I think back on that particular physical, mental, challenging sort of set of behaviors. The motivator was I wanted to get my parachute wings. The motivator was I wanted to go home and make everyone proud in my core and in my family. And the motivator was also that I didn't want to be seen by all of those people, that social group of family, friends, and military colleagues that had been seen as someone who dropped out. And so there was a whole web of behaviors in there that I was super committed to not fail. And so there was nothing that they could put me through, including all of those physical, mental prompts where I was going to back out. I mean, if I had broken a leg or something like that, that would have put me out of the game, but it wouldn't have been a quitting exercise. But
super high motivation, super high, and that's great. But we don't always have that opportunity where the motivation is so high and it's enduring. For the most part, motivation will fluctuate over time. We'll have a different motivator in a different moment. Somebody who's really, really, really cares about your company and they want to be productive. Their kid has a health crisis. Guess what happens? Their motivation to be productive for you drops because their motivation to help their kid is going to swamp out the other motivation. So our motivation
could even be their sleep. I've seen team members who are super motivated and they work really hard and they actually work too much. And then they burn themselves out after, a week or 10 days of going really hard on a project. And then their motivation is just gone because they physically or mentally wore themselves out. And then that next week, all of their results are in the gutter because they did too much. That motivation gave them a high performance. And then they had this wave of lack of motivation that caused the opposite effect pretty dramatically. BJ, how can people work with you and how do they learn more? I mean, I've got your book right here, I have it dog-eared and I've got it with all sorts of little reference points because I refer to it as I'm thinking about behavior design all the time. So
well, I'll give the best. There's two great answers and there's ones that are free and simpler, but the best answers are if you really want to understand this breakthrough system, read Tiny Habits. There's a lot in the book. And I could have made it a shorter book, but I wanted to share the depth and the richness of the system of behavior design. And so that book is all my work. I'm not summarizing other people's stuff. I'm not padding it with long stories.
There's a ton more in there than simply the one mechanism of Tiny Habits. The title says Tiny Habits, but it's got a lot of information packed in there that you can use.
So that's a gold standard. The other thing at that level is my 2-day boot camp, which I just completed. If it's in person, it's 2 days in a row, about 9 hours each day. And that's intensive training with me with a small group. That's terrific. And we're also doing that remotely. So the boot camp in the book, if you can't step up to that level, or if you want to work up to it, do the free Tiny Habits program. There's a 5-day program in Tiny Habits. Go to tinyhabits.com/join, and you'll work with a coach that I trained, and you do it over email. The total time commitment over the course of the 5 days is 35 minutes. So that's a small commitment to learn a lot about habits and some about behavior design. The baby step into the book would be to go to audible.com find my book, and just listen to the preface. So I had them put the 15-minute preface in front of the paywall. They weren't going to do this, but one thing led to another, and I negotiated with them, and they pulled the whole preface, and you just go to the webpage and click a button. You don't even have to log in. That's probably how to get started. Just get a feeling for what the book's about. If you want to look at my broader work, including my Stanford research and projects, bjfogg.com is the dashboard or the springboard to looking at other things that I'm doing.
And when are you going to offer a booster, next level experience for all of us veteran boot campers who just want to keep diving in more?
It's funny you would say that. I had the Rosalind, Michael and Rosalind
Yes.
at my boot camp this week, who are part of the Genius Network.
Yeah,
and they inspired me. Stay tuned. There will at some point be something for graduates of behavior design bootcamp like yourself, so we can continue learning and sharing and optimizing. But for now, the book and the bootcamp is the thing. After that, people say, well, what else can I do? What else can I read? There's nothing else to read. You are now at the forefront. You are now blazing trails that haven't
other than
been
that, you got
blazed.
to either other than that, until you produce the next program, we'll have to come to just be your lab assistant.
Yeah. But the point I want to make here, Don, is there comes this point when you read the book and come to my boot camp that then you put it into practice. That's
exactly
the frontier. There's no other book to read. There's no other thing that training for me. Yeah, I can train you more, but you are ready to put it into practice. And that's how you really learn the most.
Yeah, the thing I find about once I've learned, I had the pleasure of not just reading your book, but going into a real deep dive for about 10 hours over 10 weeks, just on chapters in the book with you before I did the boot camp, which was an absolute privilege. But once I had all that foundational insight, and I was great that it was stretched out over time, because it gave me I was able to make all these connections so I could start to figure out how to apply it. And applying it has been really interesting. And I've applied it in a lot of unique ways to help my people be more successful by figuring out how to get incompetencies off of their accountabilities, to change in the way they design quarterly rocks in the EOS system, to designing, redesigning goals and a lot of fun things, because once you learn this work, it's almost like you view everything through that lens of behavior design, because at the end of the day, even when we sleep and everything else we do in our life, it's humans take action in everything we do, which are just behaviors. And so I see the whole world through that lens now.
Yeah. And it's such a great feeling to have that. Let me give a quick example. The county parks here where I live about 10 years ago were threatened. They were going to shut them down, et cetera. So I brought behavior design to the county parks team, and all the parks, because of behavior design, all the parks stayed open. They actually acquired new parks. Everybody stayed employed. So this daunting problem that was in the newspaper, like, oh no, we're gonna have to close our parks. I didn't know what the answer was, but I knew with behavior design, we could figure out the best answer, and we did. And it actually led to $1 million in revenue year after year, until 8 years later, they passed a tax measure. So in other words, some pretty straightforward behavior design saved the parks, brought in $1 million of income, 8 million plus over the years. And it's a great feeling. Just any challenge, it's like, well, I might not know the answer, but I know how to tackle this problem. And it's just the steps of behavior design.
Yeah. And it can be applied to something as simple as losing 10 pounds or brushing your dog's teeth or helping your entire workforce be safe. Or creating new successful goals for your company. All of it can be accomplished with this methodology. So there's no small measures in tiny habits.
And Don, this is one reason I really appreciate you inviting me to be on your podcast and talk about this. For me, what matters is helping people be happier and healthier. Mm-hmm. And you're reaching an audience that will then reach thousands and many thousands. And health is on the line. but also human life and safety is on the line. And so for me to be able to help people be healthier and safer, and in some cases, frankly, not have life-threatening accidents, that's amazing. That's an important use of my work. So I really appreciate you inviting me to share.
Well, the goal over the next 10 years is to help 5,000 industrial companies have 0 injuries annually, which when I did the math on that in the industrial space, it's at least 10 million people that would be impacted by that between coworkers and families. And so that's my goal, is to use behavior design along with embedding it in some software and some tools to help make it easier, to help 5,000 companies never hurt a single person. So
that's so great.
That's the goal.
That's terrific. Dawn, calling me when you need my help on that. I am super, this aligns with my life's mission and my career mission, which is kind of one and the same. I'm so glad to hear how you're using behavior design. Let me know how I can be helpful.
I will stay in touch, my friend. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And there you have it. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening to this episode of the Amplifier Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about or get in touch with either Dr. BJ Fogg or our host, Don Cooper, then you can do so at any time by following their links in the description of this episode. Make sure you leave us a 5-star rating. It truly does help out the show a lot, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss any future episodes. But with all that said, I truly do hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Amplifier Podcast, and we cannot wait to see you here next time.